Hey, welcome, folks. I'm Eric Squires. I'm your president for the Washington County Public Affairs Forum, and today we've got District Attorney Rob Hermann, and it's really great to have him back. It's been a couple of years since we've had him. I'd also like to acknowledge the presence of one of the candidates, and if there's any candidates in the room, could you raise your hand? Hey, there's Jason Yergel. Why don't you shout out which race you're running in?
I'm running in the Democratic primary for House District 34 State Representative. It is an open seat. The current representative, Chris Harper, is not seeking re-election, and I am seeking re-election.
Excellent. Welcome. I'd like to announce a couple of the upcoming programs that we've got. Next week is really at the heart of what we do here at the Forum, and that is Tualatin Valley Cable Access's manager, Kevin Howard, will be speaking about cable access. And really, if you get into the nuts and bolts of what happened in the history of the Forum, we outgrew Sailor's Country Kitchen. And in order to continue getting the message across, we brought in cable access and have done that ever since. Kevin will be talking about some of the issues and changes coming along with that organization. And as I've said previously, one of the lobbying efforts that I'm going to be doing behind the scenes is to see if we can get a high-definition channel available that we can broadcast on. Currently, we just record in standard definition, but our programs are recorded in high definition and go out on YouTube in high definition. We have yet to receive our confirmation for the February 10th program. On February 17th, a drug-free coalition called Hillsborough Empowers Youth will be presenting. We have our very own John Hutzler presenting on the 24th, our county auditor, and then Dr. Jeremy Brown, who's the new college president of all the campuses for Portland Community College, will be presenting here. The last non-election program we have for this season will be Tom Marsh, author of To the Promised Land, A History of Government and Politics in Oregon. This author has some really interesting insight on what has led us to the place we're at for Oregon politics. It appears that on March 17th we'll commence with our elections programming, and John McWilliams will be organizing the elections programming, and we'll have virtually all races being run available for candidates to present here. So Mr. Yergel, we hope to see you back here again. With that being said, I would ask, and forgive me for how lame this is, but would you please put your handcuffs together and jingle for Mr. Rob Hermann? He'll be up here in just 1 second. Thank you. Come on up.
All right. Thank you, Eric. I'm not sure if everybody's wearing handcuffs, how receptive my audience might be. As district attorney, I might have had something to do with that. So, greetings to you all. Thank you for coming. For those that are watching, thanks for watching and listening. I was asked to talk about kind of the district attorney's office in Washington County and you know, where we're going, where's the future, and I thought. You know, when I talk to my friends sometimes, some of them aren't always real clear about, you know, what is the past, you know, what is the district attorney's office and what do we do? We have a saying in our office is no news is good news, because that means either if there's no news, then hopefully there's no horrific or sensational crime that's occurred in the county with, of course, with victims and all the tragedies that go with that. And it also means even though we're dealing with what we're dealing with, that hopefully nobody's stepped in it and there's nothing controversial that you know, gets in the paper. But the reality is, as I was telling John Leeper when he asked how things were going, I said, well, business is booming. And for many of you in a business, that's a good thing. And as a prosecutor, that's not necessarily a good thing. You know, we just soon show up and have the jail log be empty and crime to disappear and have to find other work, but I suspect that hasn't happened in my lifetime as a prosecutor and probably won't in my lifetime period. So, so what I thought today, though, is to talk a little bit about, you know, what do we do as a district attorney's office, and then a little bit maybe about, you know, where we've been as prosecutors in Washington County and where we are now and what we foresee in the future. And for many of you, hopefully none of you have been a crime victim, but if you have been, or know someone that has, you know that that usually has a connection with the district attorney's office. And so let me tell you a little bit about what we do. Primarily, it's often been said that we prosecute crimes. We're the criminal prosecutor, so we don't represent people charged with crimes. We do most all the crimes in Washington County. The system works this way. In Oregon, there's 36 counties, 36 elected district attorneys, of which I'm one. Primarily, with some legal exceptions, we just deal with crimes that occur within Washington County. The city of Beaverton has a municipal court that takes some of them. Some of them go to justice court that we don't see, but we deal with the bulk of crimes in Washington County. Now, I won't bore you with statistics. I heard a sports talk show the other day, and they said if you talk about statistics for more than 2 minutes, you've bored everybody, and that's not what you do. But just briefly, we have a budget of about $12.5 million. Most of that money, about $10 million, comes from the general fund, the property tax dollars. There's also in Washington County, we have a law enforcement levy, which is pretty significant. It's up for renewal every 4 or 5 years, and it helps fund services in the law enforcement arena. The sheriff's, part of the sheriff's office, it helps fund the jail, operation of the jail, helps fund our office, it helps fund the juvenile department, community corrections. It also serves to provide some funds to the one and only domestic violence shelter in Washington County. And if you're familiar at all with that arena, it's hard to believe we only have one in a county of about $550,000, but we do. And so money from the levy goes to help support those services, as well as some of the homeless shelters in Washington County. And all those things, and other things as well, all those things tie together. And as I'll tell you as I speak, one of the things I've seen changed over the years and is so critical for the criminal justice system is relationships and partnerships with nonprofit organizations, profit organizations, government unities, all trying to work together to make a criminal justice system that serves the purpose of protecting the public. So what do we do in the Washington County District Attorney's Office? Well, mainly we prosecute crimes. That's not all of it. We have a Child Support Enforcement Division, a group of about 14 individuals who work with the collection of child support. And that support may have been ordered by the court in divorce cases, in child custody cases, in paternity cases, but it's money for children. And we average a collection rate of about total of about $25 to $30 million each year. So it's a pretty significant function. We have attorneys in our juvenile department, 2 attorneys assigned over there, and we have 2 full-time law clerks out of a stable of about 10 law clerks that we hire every year. And they work both for what we call juvenile delinquency, that's the prosecution of crimes committed by juveniles, but also dependency, which a lot of people don't know that the district attorney's office, we prosecute, but we're involved in dependency matters where kids have been the victims of typically abuse, neglect, maybe abandonment, or just in situations where the government has been forced or tasked to remove those kids or to supervise those kids in those environments. So we provide part of the voice to help protect those kids in that process. And then the rest of our shop is dealing with criminal prosecution. And I would be loath not to mention or to talk about our victims segment, victims assistance segment in our office. A number of, as it happens, all dedicated women to services for crime victims. And as I get on a little further, when I talk about things we used to do and things we do now, and things we'll be doing in the future, that's the classic example of the recognition of crime victims in our state and in our nation and certainly in our county. So those people in our Victims Assistance Office, they have, over the last couple years, have averaged over 55,000 victim contacts in Washington County. Now, that's a little deceiving because that doesn't mean we have 55,000 crime victims, although it seems like it sometimes. But it means that those are contacts with victims. So in some cases, we may have multiple contacts with a victim through the course of of the criminal case. In other cases, there may be just one contact where we're advising them, helping them with a restitution claim or something if they've been the victim of some type of property crime. Those folks are involved in informing victims of their rights. In some cases, accompaniments for victims in court. We have a stable of volunteers, and like I mentioned before, government doesn't do it alone. The value of volunteers in our victims unit is hard to put a price on. I can tell you, last year they registered over 3,700 hours of volunteer time by victims. Some are suited and want to come in and just help with the typing and the filing. Others are hands-on, where they literally sit with a family in a child abuse case where the parents sit outside perhaps while the case is going on, and they sit with the family, may sit with them in the courtroom. Homicide cases, they'll sit with the family, sit in the courtroom, kind of explain what's happening, answer questions. But in many cases, just being there in a strange environment and some of the most difficult times that one can imagine, and just providing kind of some comfort and some help to them. And that service, a lot of that's done by our volunteers. Harking back to the old days, when I was prosecuting a homicide case, we didn't have a victims assistant unit for the most part. It was me, and I'm in court trying the case, prosecuting the case. During the breaks, at times I actually had to use the restroom, so I wasn't available. And during the lunch hour, typically we didn't eat lunch, but every once in a while we try to get a bite in, all the while trying to help the victims through the process. And as you can imagine, that was less than ideal. Hopefully we did what we could, and both before and after the day of court, we would kind of debrief and let them know what was going on. But that's a service that our victims folks provide now that is invaluable. Helping with restitution and crime victims' compensation. If you've ever been the victim of a crime where you've had some financial loss, some of the forms and the process can be pretty intimidating, and so our folks are there to advise what needs to be filled out, what information is needed, and collects that information so our attorneys can present it to the court at the conclusion of the case. Oregon has a state crime victims compensation fund, so when someone has some serious injuries, require a lot of medical attention and so forth, they may be able to be compensated through that fund through the state, and that requires kind of a process to work itself too. So our folks are there to help people through the process. And justice is, well, we often say that justice is far more than a conviction at the end of a criminal case. It's about the whole process, and sometimes in a lot of ways helping people and victims through the process, being with them, giving them a voice is as important, if not more important, than the actual end result. And so that's what these folks are involved in. And then also they're involved in safety planning. Large number of domestic violence cases, people that need some help in figuring out how to be safe. So safety planning, and then referrals. Referrals to, I mentioned, the domestic violence center, so referrals to a lot of the partners in the community who specialize in helping folks, helping people through their times. And as you know, if you've ever had well, I won't use Cover Oregon, but if you ever had to navigate a website or a process and figure out how do I get what I'm trying to get, it can be pretty daunting sometimes. And with technology, I'm of the age where I swear I click the wrong button and my screen goes blank more often than is humanly possible. So we've got folks though that'll help people in referrals, get them to where they need to go, and counseling services, those types of things, and so that's a very hugely valuable part of our office. The rest of it is prosecution of criminal cases. Large volume. I won't cite you the statistics on that, but I thought what might be interesting, I get out some and speak to a lot of the Citizens Academies and leadership groups and so forth, and I found this kind of tells a tale a little bit. So today, for those of us here, it's Monday, January 27th. So what that means in our office is that since about 4 a.m. on last Friday to 4 a.m. this morning, people are getting arrested in Washington County and charged with new crimes by the various police agencies. And those cases then show up in our office Monday morning. So Monday is one of those days that, you know, everybody says, it's Monday morning. Well, Monday morning is full of surprises typically for us. As I often say when I talk at schools and so forth, they say, well, what's the best thing about your job? And I say, you know, I think the best thing about my job is there's always something new. And that's literally true. And then, well, what's the worst thing about your job? Well, I'm in my, I've lost track, 39th or 40th year as a prosecutor in Washington County. So I can say with little doubt, the worst thing about my job sometimes is there's always something new. You know, you would think you'd had it all figured out, and just when you think you do, there's something new, which is both challenging but keeps you going. So here's what our attorneys woke up to, if you will, this morning when they walked in. We've got staff that's busily culling through the jail log and pulling out all the new arrests. So now these are misdemeanor arrests, so these are people that could only, the maximum sentence is potential is a year in jail. So here are the crimes that we're sorting through this morning. I'll go through these kind of fast. DUI, driving under the influence and possession of some type of drug. Hit and run, DUI on a suspended license, violation of a restraining order, and that's where someone's gotten an order of protection against an individual. Another driving while suspended, a domestic violence assault, a domestic violence harassment, that's some type of physical contact without an injury, a domestic violence assault, a theft, a criminal mischief, this is damage of property, another DUI with a firearm, carrying a firearm in the car, apparently, another carrying a concealed weapon without a license, driving while suspended, DUI and reckless driving, criminal trespass and theft, that's page 1, criminal mischief, theft, DUI, resisting arrest, and false information. I didn't tell them their true name. That's usually doesn't go over well. DUI, hit and run with reckless driving and an assault, so someone was likely injured in that crash. A domestic violence assault, disorderly conduct, DUI, a false report, DUI, theft, public indecency. Figure out what that is. DUI on a suspended license, hit and run, and domestic harassment. So 39 arrests for misdemeanors. That's not a record day by far. I think it was 60 or 70 one weekend. And just of note, we at the bottom of our list, the secretaries they go through just our Washington County files or computer and identify those with that are on probation or with pending cases, and 10 of the 39 made that category. We've seen them before recently. So felonies, those are cases that potentially have the impact of prison, although it's kind of a misnomer in Oregon that statistically, roughly 75% of all persons convicted of a felony cannot go to prison based upon our laws. So that means they typically go to probation, or conversely, 25% of those convicted of felonies are eligible for prison. So here's the felony crowd. It's only 2 pages, and you'll see a theme in this. Delivery of methamphetamine, that's selling meth. Possession of heroin. Possession of methamphetamine. Possession of heroin. Unlawful use of a weapon. Theft times 9. That's a lot of victims and a lot of theft. Felony DUI, that typically, it can vary, but that typically means the individual must have had at least 3 or 4 prior DUI convictions before they reach the point where it becomes a felony in Oregon. That would tell you that individual is likely a threat in a lot of ways, a repeat offender. Identity theft, criminal mistreatment and assault on a child. Assault in the second degree, that's an injury with a weapon. Selling marijuana. Sexual abuse in the first degree of an adult, so that's a sexual assault involving touching. Possession of heroin. Selling, 2 people arrested likely together, selling methamphetamine. Possessing a forged instrument and with methamphetamine along with it. A felony assault with a weapon. Theft, possession of meth, felony hit and run, so somebody got hurt in the accident and they left. A couple were arrested for robbery. Selling heroin, burglary in the first degree. That's a residential burglary typically with possession of meth upon their arrest. Felony assault 4, typically those involve an assault of a spouse or a significant other in the presence of a child, or it means that they've assaulted that person before and been convicted of it. Possession of methamphetamine, identity theft, and possession of heroin. 30 on the log. I think the record, I'm not sure, I've lost track, but I think it was 56 that we woke up to on a Monday morning arrest. And of that group, 7 of them are familiar to us recently, either being on probation or having open cases. That's where they've been arrested and been released pending appearance. So those get, as we speak, it's a good thing I'm here because I don't have to do that. They're there sorting through that this morning, reviewing the case and making charging decisions and getting those cases started. So that's a pretty typical Monday. We have a couple days, but it wasn't Super Bowl weekend and it wasn't New Year's Eve, so there was no particular triggers this weekend. That's pretty typical of, of what we do. In the meantime, we have a full criminal docket, and I brought the docket today. And don't worry, I'm not going to read this one to you. It's a little smaller. It's 90 pages of docket entries. Not all of them are criminal cases by all means. There's all sorts of. It's the entire docket, but interspersed amongst these are a number of criminal cases that our attorneys will be appearing on. And then also at the same time, we have 2 grand juries. I don't know if anybody's been on jury duty before, or perhaps grand jury, but grand jurors are specially selected. They basically serve as a buffer between government and citizens and review typically the more serious cases, to assess whether a crime's occurred and whether the case should move on. So on any given time during the course of a term, we have 5 grand juries in Washington County because of the volume and spacing it out. We need that many to kind of hear our cases. So today on Monday we have 2 of them working. One's called the A and one's called the E. Just because the first one gets picked is on the A and the second one, or the last one, is on the E of our 5. But so here's cases that our attorneys are in the grand jury on today, just to give you a flavor. A sodomy 1 and sex abuse 1, a rape 1, a mail theft case, an assault in the 3rd degree case which typically involves multiple defendants in some type of an assault. That's what the grand jury A, it's what the citizen volunteers for jury, they got picked for jury duty, that's what they have to hear this morning. The E grand jury is hearing a domestic violence assault, a car theft, a weapons menacing harassment charge, an encouraging child sexual abuse charge, and a robbery charge. So that's kind of a slice of the, of what we do on a given day in a prosecutor's office. And I should mention that, and you probably know this, although it's interesting that it's just not necessarily common knowledge. When they talk about Washington County, a lot of people say, oh, so you take the cases from the sheriff's office. And yes, we do. We take cases from the Washington County Sheriff's Office, but there are actually 11 police agencies in the county, Washington County, that we receive cases from. Now, one of them we don't receive too many for. That's Portland Police. There in fact is part of the city of Portland that's in Washington County, and there's a legal rule that allows if a crime occurs within a mile of the county lines, that can be prosecuted in the other county. And so typically Portland police take some cases when they venture into Washington County, City of Portland areas. They typically go to Multnomah County, but we get some Portland police cases from time to time. And then the state police, they have an outpost in the Banks area, and they patrol our highways, not as much as they used to in the days when we had a lot of state police, but so we'll get cases from the state police. But then the rest of them, sheriff's office, I hope I don't have to look down because sometimes I forget one, which is never a good thing. But we have North Plains, Cornelius, Forest Grove, Hillsborough, Beaverton, Tigard, Tualatin, Sherwood, and the sheriff's office, as I mentioned. So we get cases from all those police agencies. So when I talk about our law enforcement levy that we have that provides some funding for our office, I often go out and remind the public of that. It's because usually the question is, well, if I live in the city of Beaverton, I've got my services, I've got my police department. You know, why the heck would I want to pay additional money to, you know, in this law enforcement levy for services, you know, law enforcement services when we have it all? And the answer is that, well, we're the ones typically handle those cases. And the other important answer, and the juvenile department's the one that handles those juveniles, and the probation department is the one that handles those people that are on probation or parole. And your domestic violence victims in your county may well be using the services of the DV Center, and kind of on and on. And also an important feature in Washington County is that, to understand and know, is that there's one jail. So Beaverton arrests somebody, they bring them to the Washington County Jail, and that's run by the sheriff, and it is in part supported too by the levy. That's where people go pending trial, and that's where a lot of them go when they're sentenced. And so it really is a county, it's a county effort. So I've told you a little bit about what we do on a, like today. Oh, one other sheet, and I won't read you these all off, but this is about 5 pages, and this is a list that we get periodically. These are the people that will be coming out of prison in the next 4 months back into Washington County. And so that means that they'll typically be on post-prison supervision, so they'll be supervised by the probation department. Hopefully we won't see them again. That's kind of another topic in terms of recidivism rate, and I'll talk a little bit more about kind of some things we're doing nowadays that wasn't done very well at the statewide level, and that is dealing with what they call reentry, dealing with some of that population that comes out of prison. What's being done to make our best efforts to make sure they don't end up committing new crimes and going back to prison. But I thought I'd read the mission statement of the district attorney's office. I think that's always helpful in kind of explaining, you know, okay, we know you prosecute crimes, and we've heard a lot about what the crimes are, and so what is your goal? And the mission is, some of it may sound kind of trite, but it's something we deal with every day: to uphold the United States Constitution and the Constitution and the laws of the state of Oregon. So in our decision making, in our prosecution in courtrooms before the grand jury, that's critical to our mission and role, as we make sure we're following the laws and the rules and upholding the law and being knowledgeable of the law. Believe me, that's a challenge. In Oregon, the appellate courts come out with decisions every week. And so the analogy that I sometimes make, you know, well, let's say you're a football fan. You got the Super Bowl coming up, and right now going into the Super Bowl, the object is, depending on which team you want, is for your team to score more points than the other team, right? And at the end of the game, you look at the scoreboard, and if it's 20-10, the team that has 20 is the winner. Sometimes it feels like, this is my violin piece, but sometimes it feels frustration a little bit is with appellate cases sometimes is, so you go into your trial, you know what the rules are, you know what the result is, and then the appellate decision says, you know what, that particular evidence that you introduced is no longer admissible because we don't believe that a doctor's opinion, unsupported by physical evidence, is legally sufficient. That can be misleading. And so you have now lost the case that you won because you had 20 points and they only had 10. And now they're saying, well, actually, if you have 10 points, you win. That's a little simplistic, but the point being that we need to be, all lawyers that are in this business need to be, paying attention to what's coming out every week, because that can change how you draft a will. It can change how you, what evidence is admissible in court. It can change what you can do. And it also gives us the responsibility of getting out to our police agencies and police officers and keeping them, they're trying to do their work. They're not reading the appellate cases every Wednesday morning, and so it keeps them, busy as well, and us with them. To preserve the safety of the public, no, we don't go out and patrol the streets and put our lives at risk every day with some of the stuff that's going on, but the decisions we make and what we charge, the skill we exercise in the prosecution of cases, have a great deal to do with protecting the public, and as I mentioned before, through our victims people, we actually have safety plans for victims. There's a lot that what we do and in what we do that's critically important to making sure we use wisdom and good sense in handling our cases. Protect the rights of crime victims. I told you a little bit about how we deal with crime victims, and I'll talk a little bit about what rights crime victims had, what rights we have today and we didn't have a little while ago, a few years ago, and to pursue justice for all citizens with skill, honor, and integrity. And as I've had over the years some victims tell me when I'm talking about the case and the prospects and so forth, and they said, so, we don't really get to pick our lawyer, right? I go, well, no, you kind of, I am your lawyer, and hopefully they weren't saying that derogatorily, but but that's kind of the concept, is that if you're the victim of a crime, you come into the district attorney's office and we are the lawyers. You don't typically get to hire out your own lawyer. I learned, interestingly, a number of years ago, I was in Russia and they were trying to learn how to implement jury trials. And it wasn't going over too well with the attorney general there. Concept just seemed to fly in the face of tradition a little bit. And we were kind of thinking, boy, how backward is this? They're resisting jury trials, or they're resisting citizens involved in the decision-making process. And so they asked me what happens if you don't take a case? And I go, well, that's the decisions that we make every day. We have to make decisions what to do. And, well, what's the consequence? And I go, well, I guess the consequence is that the voters at the ballot box, because if it was a bad decision, the public's going to tell me by saying, we don't want you as a DA anymore. That was dumb. You do dumb things. And of course, they had this very quizzical look. And if you've ever been in those situations where you're speaking to a group and it's being translated, so you speak and the translator speaks, and so there's like this, it's like talking on the old telephones when overseas, you talk and there's like a 5-second delay and it's like, aren't you listening? But that's just the way it works. So there's this kind of this delay, and then they had this very puzzled look on their face. It just didn't register. And so as we kind of worked through it, I found out that the reason it didn't register was in Russia, if the prosecutor doesn't take the case, then the victim proceeds with the case on his or her own with their own lawyer. And the victim has the right to sit at the table with the prosecution in a case to represent their own interests. And so here we were, and I was with a bunch of three appellate court judges from Oregon. And it was really kind of interesting. It was kind of an eye-opener for all of us. It was like, well, here's a system that's kind of backwards, but maybe they've got it right here, is that victims have rights and they should have their interests protected. And if the DA isn't going to do it right, then they have the right to have their say in court. So So hopefully, you know, we do our job, and that is our job to, you know, to do it well and to use wisdom in doing it. And all the time recognizing that the decisions we make are not always popular. And so kind of one of our common phrases, I say, look, you got to look at yourself in the mirror when you get up and when you go to bed, and tell yourself and feel that you did the right thing, and because not everybody's going to think you did, and got to always keep an open mind and question why they're thinking that. But it's kind of like a sporting event again, is when the referee makes a call, usually there's not 100% agreement with that call, unless it's like really obvious, and a lot of times it's not. So the question that was kind of posed is, where have we been? And I'll be mindful of the time, so I make sure I have time for questions. So where have we been in the district attorney's office? And if I've been paying attention, I have a pretty good perspective on that. Like I said, I've been in the DA's office for, I lose track when it gets to that last year, 39 or 40 years. I started as a law clerk in 1973. You know, that's shocking to many of you. You probably say, a guy in his 40s, how could he have started in that? I won't ask for a show of hands or an age guess, because that might not turn out too well for me. But so I started as a law clerk in 73, and in the fall of 73, my third year, I graduated. I hung around. I really liked the job. They didn't have any openings. I hung around, and fortunately, there was an opening on December 4th of 1974. One of the deputy DAs got appointed judge, and fortunately, Ray Robinette, then the district attorney, hired me, and I started in January of 75 as a prosecutor. So I've seen a lot of change, and I know many of you are from Washington County and from the surrounding area. You know what I mean when you've seen a lot of change, both physically and then just in what we do and how it's done and what happens around here, and then certainly just in the world, wherever you are, there's a lot of change. One of the things of where we were, my first jury trial, I told my daughter this the other day, who's a prosecutor in another county. I said, don't worry if you lose your first case, because my first jury trial I lost. My first jury trial was a guy that was going, does everybody know what VBR means? It's violation of the basic rule. It's kind of like a speeding ticket. It means, based on the circumstances, you know, the speed limit's posted at 35, but if you're going 40 and the circumstances or stuff, that's justifiable. So I had a guy that was a very nice guy in court. He was going 47 and a 35. No traffic, sunny day, clear pavement, and it was a jury trial, because back in those days, you were entitled to a jury trial for traffic violations. Now that sounds like a good thing, except the flip side was you could go to jail for up to 10 days in those days for a traffic violation. So there may be some of you in the room that may have had one of those back in those days and weren't aware of the potential consequences. I never heard of such a thing, but that was the law in Oregon, and so since you could go to jail, you were entitled to a jury trial. So, and unfortunately, this guy didn't have a lawyer. He represented himself. So now you know, I shouldn't tell you because I have to run for election, but my first jury trial, I lost to a guy that didn't even have a lawyer representing him. And it didn't take very long either. And to this day, I'm trying to remember who it was that gave me that case, because I'd like to pay him a visit. Fortunately, it didn't scar me forever, but it was a few years after that. I actually had the privilege of working on the Oregon change to the traffic laws. I worked with the late Judge Don Ashmanskas, a great guy who was a judge here in Washington County, city of Beaverton, Washington County, and then a federal magistrate. And the law was changed so that now it seems like you're going to jail if you get one of those tickets, because the fines are horrific, but that law was different. I remember too about where we were. The state police used to drive around and pick up the police reports in the morning from the different police agencies. They had kind of the south end and the west end state trooper that would drive to the different police stations and pick up the reports. So remember that jail log that I read you? Now, back in those days, it wasn't as numerous as that. But in those days, we wouldn't get the police reports until the OSP trooper showed up with the reports, and they literally hand them to us. So we didn't get started on those till, fairly late in the morning. That was a little different. No fax machines, no email. The world has changed, and the world of crime was a little different too then, because the good forgers, the good identity thieves, those were the guys that could write a good hand signature that looked a lot like yours if they got a hold of your checks. So I remember we literally had guys that were like really good at writing, and then came whiteout. Wow, that was the best thing criminals ever saw, because if you could use whiteout and didn't have to use the eraser. I mean, I used to see checks where they erased so much to change the name, there'd be a little hole in the check. Now, don't ask me who accepted it, but they'd be accepted. And then whiteout came along, and so you could actually change the amount on a check and change the names on the check. Well, the world has changed dramatically. Not that many years ago, I remember we had a case where one of our deputies said, so the police sees this bag of mail in the trunk, and what type of charge do you think that is? And I said, well, did they go through the bag? Well, no, they didn't go through the bag. It was just a bag of mail. I go, well, there's a lot of stuff in the mail. They'd been hitting rural post boxes and just collecting it and throwing. I said, there's a lot of stuff that's in the mail. There's like checks and stuff. There's the potential for all sorts of havoc with that. And kind of the concept was, well, we never really thought of that. So unfortunately, the crime has developed now where we've got ID theft. Not too many years ago, my registration card for Tualatin Hills Park and Rec, your identification number was your Social Security number. And it's not that many years ago. And so now we're being a little more conscious about that. And of course, now with technology, it's just exploded in terms of the type of counterfeits and checks and so forth. So it's a whole new focus in law enforcement than we used to have. That's a change. And of course, I don't need to tell you, but science has changed. When I used to prosecute rape cases or murder cases where there was physical evidence of sexual assault or blood, we'd get a blood type. So I could get in before the jury and said, ladies and gentlemen, only 40% of the world has the same blood type as this suspect. Well, as you can imagine, I better have more evidence than that, because that wasn't going to convict anybody of anything. And now we have DNA, which one case I think of, I had a murder case in the late 80s. A teenage girl named Autumn Chin was found. She'd been sexually assaulted, beaten, and was found, had been in a river probably for 10 days in the Tualatin River. Horrible case. And suspect was developed, and they were just starting with this stuff called DNA. Nobody here in Oregon could analyze it, so we had to use the FBI. One of our other attorneys had a case, and so he joined on the case and did all the scientific stuff. The argument was to admit the DNA in the murder trial, because they said that they didn't have numbers back then, but they said it fit this suspect's profile. And very good judge excluded the evidence. I mean, a very good judge, because at the times, the defense had an expert. They had two experts, one from the University of Washington and one from the University of Irvine. And the guy from Irvine was a fruit fly expert, Drosophila. I learned more about fruit flies than any person should have to learn, other than they're those annoying things that fly around your, ripening fruit in your house. But there's quite a genetic story with fruit flies. And the judge basically excluded the evidence, ruling that it was not sufficiently reliable enough, and it would be too confusing to jurors in the case. The defense was claiming it was voodoo science. It was something new. As it happened, when we were picking the jury, there were two people in the jury pool that worked exclusively with DNA at OHSU for research purposes, which kind of raised all our eyebrows. Fortunately, the good news is that we were still able to convict the individual we had of the charge, and we know now that the profile likely of that DNA sample we had was you would have found in only 1 in 10 billion people, and so that would have been nice evidence to have. at the time. Unfortunately, justice wasn't thwarted by its exclusion, but that's a huge change that we've had, where we were and where we are. And needless to say, technology, and we could go on and on and on and on about the change in technology. But I can tell you now, we've solved cases when I didn't know what triangulation was of cell towers, but a murder case where we were able to obtain through search warrants and court orders cell phone information, where the guy who said, yeah, that's my cell phone, I don't give it to anybody else, it's with me all the time, and I wasn't anywhere near Hague Lake. I was in, I forgot where he said he was in. Well, darned if the triangulation technology suggested otherwise. And of course we had other evidence than that, but nowadays the first thing the police do is, I'm not telling any secrets to the criminals out there, is they go on Facebook with open access that anybody can get, and you'll get confessions, admissions, bragging about where they were and what they did. So technology has changed our world, dramatically. Retrieving photos from cell phones that somebody thinks they've deleted. No, no, they haven't. It requires search warrants and court orders, but it's changed the world dramatically, and I think for a better way, because it works both ways. It both includes and excludes. So DNA will exclude a suspect just like that, and you can move on, and you don't have to rely on an identification. So the world has changed dramatically, and where we've been and where we are. Sentencing has changed dramatically, and when I prosecute a murder case, I tell the family, okay, what's the sentence going to be? I say, well, the sentence is going to be, if he's convicted, a life sentence. What's that mean? That means he'll probably be out in 8 years. And under Oregon's system back then, there was a parole board, and when I talked about victims' rights, they would have parole hearings, and the victims weren't entitled to notification. Neither was the prosecutor, neither were the judges. So they'd literally have parole hearings and they were trying to do a good job. It wasn't like they were, but that was the culture or the mindset. They'd have parole hearings, and they'd hear from the individual, and then they'd make a decision. And it was 8 years was not an unusual sentence. And that was tough news to deliver to family members, and it just wasn't right. Now we have more determinate sentencings that's changed the world considerably in terms of how we do our business. So I want to open it up for questions. Let me add one other thing. I was thinking about where are we gonna go in the future, and if I knew, I'd be rich, because I would have invested in the stuff that that tells us where the future is going to go. But I was reading an article about the projection of Amazon, .com using drones to deliver packages. So, well, guess what? We're gonna probably be dealing with drone hijackings, where people will figure out how to redirect a drone to their house to drop off all the packages. I can't imagine how that's going to work, but imagination can only imagine where we're going to be in the future. And the last thing before questions, I don't want to forget to mention this, is I alluded to it a little bit before, is partnerships. What's so important in the criminal justice system and what we do is partnerships. When I took over as DA, we started an elder abuse multidisciplinary team where we actually partnered with the Adult Protective Services Division in the county and others, police agencies and so forth, so that we can work. They have a child abuse MDT where we work with folks from the school, from Emmanuel Hospital that has a child abuse center, if you will. It's incredibly important that we work with our community partners to coordinate services, to educate, and to better serve the public. And it's in Washington County. I'm obviously, well, I am biased. Been here for many years, and we're blessed with the spirit of cooperation and the working relationships that we have amongst all sorts of agencies, profit, nonprofit, and government. And again, the bottom line is it makes us all safer. It makes this place a better place to live, and so we can be thankful for that. So, questions?
Virginia Bruce, forum member. I've been concerned for quite a while that Washington County sheriffs don't use community policing methods in the urban areas. They move people around on a regular schedule, and I believe that it doesn't serve good justice because it doesn't allow the sheriffs to get to know the people in the neighborhoods. Can you reflect on that as it comes to your office, as the cases come to your office? Do you think maybe the volume of cases could be reduced by more of a community policing program?
Well, I mean, community policing clearly has great value, and we've seen it in a lot of communities. And I know the sheriff would be here to be a better person to answering maybe particular concerns. But I know in some neighborhoods I'm well aware of the relationship actually the sheriff's deputies do in some of the incorporated areas that they have with the community and community members, and so they can in a lot of ways they can identify a problem or a potential problem or a solution because they are familiar with it. So I guess the best way to answer it is community policing does really have value. I mean, we see it in how do you approach a problem legally? A house that's got a lot of traffic, a lot of noise, a neighborhood where there's been a series of car vandalisms, and the bottom line is having relationships with members of the community and a presence there, does have real value to it. If that answers.
John Hutzler, forum member. I want to commend you and your department for, excuse me, for instituting recently the process of having the grand jury conduct an annual inspection of the Washington County Jail. As you know, Multnomah County has done this for quite a number of years, and their grand juries have identified some important issues related to the Multnomah County Jail. I'm glad to say our grand juries haven't yet identified any significant problems, but I'm curious whether there was anything which prompted the district attorney's office to begin this inspection process after quite a number of years of not doing it.
Sure, John. The Oregon statute, which is, we try to figure out how old it is, and it's like really old. I mean, it's been in existence all the time I've been there. There's a statutory requirement that yearly the grand jury conduct an inspection of the jail institutions in the county. And I think it goes back to the days when there was little known about what was going on in the jails and a lot of serious concerns about them. And so historically, we've had all our grand juries, one of them's going on today, a jail tour and a lunch where they can ask questions. And historically, if there have been things that have happened, like suicides in the jail, or we've had some thefts over the years, we had some sexual contact in the jail, we've had grand jurors that have gone in to look at things. As a practical matter, the statute being as old as it is, our jail there's a federal certification process, and the name escapes me, but where they look at, soups to nuts, A through Z, and quite a process that, an inspection that goes on yearly, where jails can be certified and can be rated and so forth. And our sheriff's office has participated in that for years and gotten very high ratings. And so, on the one hand, it's kind of like, well, how do 7 citizens in a short period of time, kind of what's going to qualify them for going in the jail and, picking this and that apart. as opposed to, you know, this national recognized organization that does it. So that's kind of why we didn't do it regularly. We dealt with issues, but then it's not just the jail. We've got a juvenile facility. We have a community corrections center that houses inmates that some are on work release. There's a lot of programming there, and we have an institution called Coffee Creek tucked in Washington County borders, where we've prosecuted a number of cases out of there involving sexual assaults of, it's primarily a female institution, of female inmates and stuff. And so it was kind of, the decision was made, you know, the times are changing. There's a lot to look at, and we need to, it takes a lot of time and a lot of investment from the citizens involved, but we wanted to ramp that up again and take a look at all those institutions and be receptive to what's going on.
Yeah, who defends Washington County against a civil suit? Would that be your office?
No, I'm happy to say it's not. It's the Washington County Council's office.
Oh,
So-
and then one more thing on your volunteers for victims assistance. Are you able to recruit volunteers that are culturally or ethnically in sync with the victim? Because there are certain groups that just don't want to step forward and help prosecute.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have a pretty good broad section. We have a lot of actually staff members and some of our volunteers that are Spanish speakers and both speak the language and have that cultural background. We've got we've got a fair number of students that come from George Fox, Pacific, some other colleges, and some even actually have a semester. Some from schools back east that have a semester where they work in our office, and some of that group has some different ethnic backgrounds that helps. And it's with volunteers, they're volunteers, you know. So, but you're absolutely right that. And in Washington County, we have a very diverse community, and so being able to relate to some people who come from countries where government and prosecution is not their friend, and I've had some of those cases. It takes some work to build up kind of a trust in terms of you know, who we are and what we do, and so that's important. Sir.
Hi, Phil Nelson, forum member. Years ago, of course, we had a system of juvenile justice, which was designed to keep juveniles out of the criminal prosecution. But it appears, as an observer of this, that we're finding more charging of juveniles as adults. And I wonder if you would comment on that, how that works, and if there is indeed an increasing trend of doing that. Sure.
Thank you. That's a very vibrant topic of conversation, you know, both across the country and here locally. In about 1995, Oregon voters passed a measure called Measure 11, which was mandatory sentences for certain crimes, and included in that group was 15, 16, and 17-year-olds who committed, there's a list of about 20 violent crimes: murder, rape, robbery, and it changed Oregon law where it basically directed them to be prosecuted as adults, you know, based upon the crime and the age, and that's different than what it used to be. That law has been advanced where over time, where those individuals will go to a youth facility, so they're not, if upon conviction they'd go to the same place they would have gone had they been convicted in the juvenile system, the Oregon Youth Authority, depending some on their behavior. If their behavior is such, it may get them to another facility. But so that was a major change in Oregon law. So that changed more juveniles being charged as adults. There's really nothing that has changed. You know, since then, at the national level, there's been discussion about whether a juvenile can get a life sentence. Juveniles can't receive the death penalty, and so there's been some, the U.S. Supreme Court's dealt with the issues of whether it's constitutional to give a juvenile a life sentence. So I don't know if I answered that very well. It's an ongoing discussion. I'm actually on the governor's public safety task force. That one of the issues we're dealing with is reviewing juvenile sentencing, and it will be a lively discussion. But one thing that we typically point out is who are the individuals that are committing the crimes where they're being charged as adults, and that's often very instructive, at least from my standpoint, when you hear who they are and what they did, because they are typically the most serious of crimes, and that that kind of frames the debate. It's like, well, what do you do with them? I will say, that prompts one thing I want to say that because this is fairly topical. The juvenile directors across the state are kind of up in arms because there's a new commission that used to be a Children and Family and Services, and now it's retitled. I forgot what it is, but their funding that they've had for a number of years that goes to prevention, and in Washington County, very successful prevention where they get probation or counselors into the schools, into the elementary schools, dealing with gang issues and trying to get to kids before there's a problem. They've joined with an organization called Fight Crime, Invest in Kids, a wonderful organization that's a nonprofit that deals with preschool education for kids, child care, a whole different facet that you don't typically think of with law enforcement, but we're close partners. Martha Brooks, the director of Oregon, does a terrific job. We're close partners because we all, like I said earlier, I'd like to get out of the business by not having any business. And one of the ways you do that is working with our kids at an early age. Anyway, this new task force has basically recommended that funding be removed. And so the juvenile directors of Oregon, I know recently their representative met with the governor, and they're trying to get out to legislatures to raise that issue and maybe change the thinking on that, because there's some very successful prevention programs, and that money may be diverted to other places. And so it's kind of a continuum. Those discussions are ongoing, but I think we all recognize that we have to be responsive to serious crime and what they've done, but locking people up and locking juveniles up is, in a lot of cases, isn't the answer if the crime and the conduct and so forth, doesn't merit it, and we need to get at the cause and do our best to redirect them. Yes, sir.
Patrick Whaler, forum member. I haven't paid attention for a couple of years, but Washington County was entitled to an additional judge, but we didn't have one. Has that changed any, or?
No, it hasn't.
So how does that impact upon your job of trying to prosecute in a timely manner?
It has a big impact, and in fact, good questions, because our judges, I was just meeting with some of them the other day, and they're making a pitch to the legislature to get a 15th judge in Washington County. We have 14, population of, I'm always afraid to say statistics, then I'll be, if I miss it, but about 550,000. Multnomah County's got, I think, 40-some judges. I think Lane County has more judges than we do, and we're a lot bigger. But it impacts our ability to get cases prosecuted, but it's the whole system. John Tyner, lawyer's in the background, he can tell you if he's representing somebody on a civil case, that tends to go down the ladder a little bit in terms of priority. And divorce cases, all sorts of adoption cases, there's all sorts of cases that suffer where, as a whole, as a system, whatever it is, if you're not getting your day in court or your justice in a timely manner, that creates livability and concerns for the whole community. And so the judges would give you the better spiel than I do, because they've got all the stats down and the information. But like I said, this docket this morning, 90-some pages, people are going to be moving quickly, and some people aren't going to get their day in court until it feels like it's kind of too late. So we're hopeful that maybe they'll get another judge. I'm not sure where they're going to put them, because the courthouse is full, but they'll find a broom closet somewhere that'll work. Okay, well, thank you all very much for your attention. Thanks.
Thanks so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
You betcha.
Thank
My
you.
pleasure.
Folks, come back in a week, and if you want to linger next week, we've got a board meeting. Otherwise, come back for Kevin Howard from TVC TV. Thanks for being here. Have a great week.